The chandelier above the table glittered like a crown of lies. Its golden light spilled across the pristine, white linen tablecloth, catching the edges of crystal glasses that sang faintly when touched. The aroma of seared scallops and truffle oil hung heavy in the air, a perfume of wealth and deception. This was the most elegant restaurant in the city, a stage meticulously chosen for my execution. Not a literal death, no, but a burial all the same. My children had dressed the scene perfectly, a celebration, they'd called it. A toast to my future. A future they had already written without me. Penelope's smile was a masterpiece of artifice, her eyelash extensions fluttering like the wings of a predator. Charles nodded with the practiced obedience of a man who had long ago traded his spine for comfort. Leo's eyes, sharp and calculating, darted to the leather folder beside his plate, the one containing the papers that would strip me of everything I had built. My empire. My life's work. My dignity. I was 72 years old, and they were burying me alive. "Mom, you're going to love the new retirement home," Penelope purred, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "They have knitting classes, art therapy, everything designed for people your age. People my age." The phrase landed like a blade between my ribs. As if 72 years had reduced me to a child, a burden, a thing to be managed and discarded. As if the real estate empire I had forged from nothing, a secretary's $5,000 life savings transformed into millions, meant less than the scarves I might knit in a room that reeked of disinfectant and despair. Charles leaned forward, his gray suit, the one I'd bought him for his college graduation, straining across his shoulders. "Dr. Miller says it's for the best, Mom. A controlled environment. Professional care." His voice was thick with concern he didn't feel, each word a shovel of dirt on my grave. Leo avoided my gaze, his fingers tracing the rim of his wineglass. "It's a wonderful place," he added, the lie slipping easily from his tongue. "You'll be safe. Happy. Safe. Happy." Words they wielded like weapons, sharp and precise. I smiled, my lips trembling with the effort to keep the storm inside me caged. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice as calm as the sea before it swallows a ship whole. Inside, something shattered, irrevocably, irreparably. My heart, perhaps. Or the last fragile thread of hope that my children still carried a shred of the love I had poured into them for decades. They thought they had won. They thought I was the confused old woman they needed me to be. They were wrong. The betrayal had been a slow poison, seeping into my life over months, years even. It began with small things, a hesitation in Charles's voice when I mentioned a new property investment, a flicker of irritation in Leo's eyes when I refused to sign over power of attorney, Penelope's too sweet questions about my health, my memory, my plans. I noticed. I always noticed. I had spent 50 years navigating a world of men who underestimated me, who saw a woman, a secretary, a widow, a mother, and assumed I was soft. Weak. I had built an empire on their miscalculations, and now my own children were making the same mistake. I tested them. I let my hands tremble when I poured tea. I forgot where I'd parked my car. I asked Charles the same question twice in one afternoon, watching his face shift from concern to calculation. I wanted to believe they would protect me, that blood was thicker than greed. But every feigned lapse, every staged moment of confusion, revealed the truth. They were vultures circling a dying beast, waiting for me to fall. And so, in that restaurant, as they toasted my new beginning, I made a choice. If they wanted to bury me, I would dig my own tunnel out of the grave they were so carefully preparing. That night, I played my part to perfection. Penelope, ever the dutiful daughter-in-law, pressed 2 white pills into my hand. "For your sleep, Margaret," she said, her eyes gleaming with something darker than concern. I smiled gratefully, my fingers closing around the pills as I shuffled to my bedroom. The door clicked shut behind me, and I spat the pills into a napkin, my heart pounding with a fury I hadn't felt since I was a young woman fighting for my first property deal. I was wide awake when they thought me drugged and helpless. At 11 p.m., their voices drifted from the kitchen, low and conspiratorial, slicing through the silence of my house like a blade through flesh. "The beach house is worth at least $300,000, Charles whispered, papers rustling on the oak dining table, the same table where I'd signed my first real estate contract 40 years ago. "The downtown condo, another $200,000. "The investments, easily $600,000 more. "We have to move fast," Penelope murmured, the clink of champagne glasses punctuating her words. "Before she realizes what's happening." Leo laughed, a cruel, guttural sound that twisted my gut. "Realizes?" She asked me what time it was 3 times yesterday. "She's gone, Pen. Completely gone. A lie. A filthy, calculated lie." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and listened as they carved up my life like a butcher with a prize steer. They waived my will, the forged one they thought I didn't know about, planning to declare me incompetent, to lock me away while they sold everything I had bled for. "She'll never know what it was all worth," Leo said, his voice dripping with triumph. "She thinks it's just a few properties." They underestimated me. They thought I was a doddering old woman, blinded by age and grief. They didn't know that every morning, I reviewed my portfolio with the precision of a hawk. They didn't know I had secrets, properties, accounts, plans, hidden so deeply they would never find them. They didn't know that Margaret Whitlock, at 72, was more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. At 5 a.m., while they slept off their champagne and betrayal, I moved like a ghost through my own house. I dressed in my best black pantsuit, the one I'd worn to close million-dollar deals. I packed a single suitcase, my passport, the jewelry I'd hidden in a secret compartment, and the key to a safe deposit box in a city they'd never think to look. In that box lay the truth, the deeds, the accounts, the will that would shatter their plans like glass beneath a hammer. The taxi driver didn't ask questions. He loaded my suitcase and drove me to the airport, where I bought a one-way ticket to Seabrook Shores, Florida. A place my children had never heard me mention. A place where it had all begun. As the plane climbed into the dawn, I closed my eyes and heard my mother's voice, sharp and unyielding. "Margaret, never trust anyone completely, not even your own children. Blood can be corrupted, but dignity is eternal." She was right. And I was about to prove it. Seabrook Shores welcomed me with the slap of salt air and the whisper of palm fronds. The yellow house with green shutters stood at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling but its soul intact. It was smaller than the mansions my children knew, but it was mine, bought with $5,000 scraped together from years of secretarial work, the first seed of an empire that had grown to millions. The key turned in the lock with a familiar creak, and the house sighed as if it had been waiting for me. Dust motes danced in the dim light, and white sheets draped the furniture like ghosts of my past. I pulled them away one by one, revealing the life I had hidden here for decades, a refuge, a fortress, a plan. In the kitchen, a note lay on the table, written in a shaky but unmistakable hand, Mrs. Whitlock, I've been waiting for you all these years. Eliza, My breath caught. Eliza, my housekeeper of 15 years, fired by my children for being an unnecessary expense. Eliza, who had loved me like family when my own blood turned cold. Footsteps on the porch sent my heart racing. The door creaked open, and there she stood, older, her hair snow-white, her face etched with time, but her eyes as warm as ever. I knew you'd come, she said, her voice steady despite the years. When I heard what they were planning, I knew you'd find your way here. How did you know? I whispered, tears burning my eyes. Eliza smiled, sad and knowing. Penelope called me. Wanted to know about your properties, your accounts. I told her nothing. But I knew about this house. I knew about your plans. I've been taking care of everything, waiting for you. She led me to a hidden office, its walls lined with filing cabinets, and a safe embedded in the concrete. The combination's still your husband's birthday, she said softly. Richard. My anchor, my partner, gone 10 years now but still protecting me. I opened the safe with steady hands, and there they were, deeds to properties my children had never dreamed of, accounts in Switzerland and Panama, and a folder marked Hope Center, my secret dream, a sanctuary for women like me, betrayed and discarded by those they loved most. Everything's ready, Eliza said, her voice thick with pride. The permits, the blueprints, the funds. It just needed you. For the first time in months I cried, not from pain, but from the realization that I was not alone. That I had built something greater than my children's greed could ever destroy. The call to Mr. Cromwell, my secret lawyer, was the spark that ignited the fire. Margaret, he said, his voice alive with anticipation, I knew you'd call today. Are you ready to begin? More than ready, I replied, staring out at the ocean, its waves crashing with a fury that matched my own. It's time to remind my children who I am. He laid out the plan, a family meeting tomorrow at my house, where my children thought they would seal my fate with forged documents and a corrupt lawyer. They had even invited my brother Tobias, the eternal opportunist, to witness their triumph. At 10:30 a.m., I would walk into my own home and turn their victory into ashes. That night, Eliza and I sat up late, drinking chamomile tea and unearthing memories like buried treasure. She told me how Penelope had visited her, probing for weaknesses, for proof of my decline. She told me about the love letters from Richard, 50 years of devotion, that my children had thrown in the trash like garbage. I held those letters in my hands, the paper yellowed but still fragrant with Richard's cologne. You are stronger than you think, he had written. If anyone tries to take your worth from you, fight with all the fury of a woman who knows her value. I would fight. And I would win. The drive back to my house was a march to war. I wore my black suit like armor, Eliza at my side like a loyal general, Mr. Cromwell following with a briefcase full of truth. The neighborhood looked the same, manicured lawns, blooming roses, but it felt like enemy territory. My own home, invaded by those I had loved most. I rang the doorbell. The symbolism burned. I, Margaret Whitlock, had to ask permission to enter the empire I had built with my own hands. Penelope opened the door, and her face was a theater of emotions, shock, fear, and then that sickly sweet smile. Margaret. We were so worried, she cried, her voice pitched for an audience. We called the police, the hospitals. I was thinking, I said, stepping past her, my voice cutting through her performance like a blade. And making some decisions. Charles and Leo froze in the living room, their faces draining of color. Tobias, my brother, stood awkwardly by the dining table, where papers lay spread like a banquet of betrayal. A small man with a nervous mustache, Mr. Evans, their hired lawyer, hovered over the documents, oblivious to the storm about to break. "Who is it?" he called, his voice trembling. "My legal representative," I announced, my tone cold as steel. "George Cromwell, specialist in elder fraud." The room went still, as if the air itself had stopped breathing. Mr. Cromwell entered, Eliza at his side, his briefcase a weapon loaded with justice. He greeted Mr. Evans with a smile that promised ruin. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said formally, "I understand you're here to sign over your assets." "That's right," I said, my eyes never leaving my children's faces. Charles gripped a chair, Leo's hand shook, and Penelope's smile faltered like a candle in a storm. "Before we proceed," Mr. Cromwell continued, "I need to verify your mental competence." "She's perfectly competent." Penelope snapped, too quickly, too desperately. "Interesting," Mr. Cromwell said, his smile sharpening. "Because I have a medical report from Dr. Sanchez, dated 3 days ago, confirming Mrs. Whitlock's full mental capacity." He placed the report on the table, and I added my own copy from my purse, letting it fall like a gauntlet. Then came the recordings, hours of my children's voices, captured with my consent over the past year, spilling their venom in my own home. "Let's just hope she dies soon," Charles's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm tired of pretending I care." "All we need is to declare her incompetent," Leo added. "Then it's easy." "She's just a stubborn old woman," Penelope sneered. "We'll put her in the cheapest home we can find." The silence that followed was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Tobias looked horrified, his dreams of a payout crumbling. Mr. Evans began packing his briefcase, his face slick with sweat. "Out of context." Charles stammered, but his voice was hollow, broken. 3 hours of context, Mr. Cromwell said, his laugh cold and merciless. "All recorded legally, with Mrs. Whitlock's full knowledge." Eliza swept the forged documents into a pile, her eyes blazing. "These are fraudulent," she declared. "The signatures, the assets, none of it holds up. It's impossible." Mr. Evans protested, but he was already edging toward the door. "It's very possible," I said, stepping forward, my voice a whip. "When you underestimate the woman who built everything you're trying to steal." I took my place at the head of the table, the queen reclaiming her throne. My children sat like prisoners awaiting judgment, their faces pale, their eyes haunted. Tobias hovered, useless and ashamed. Mr. Evans was gone, his tail between his legs. Let's talk numbers, I said, my voice steady but laced with a fury that had been simmering for years. You think my estate is worth $1.5 million? They exchanged nervous glances, caught in their own trap. You're off by more than $3 million. Penelope gasped. Charles's knuckles went white on the chair. Leo's mouth opened but no sound came. $5.2 million, I said, savoring their shock. Properties you never knew about. Accounts in Zurich, Panama. Businesses I've run quietly for decades. A real estate consultancy, 2 investment firms, and I paused, letting the moment hang like a guillotine, the Hope Center. Mr. Cromwell projected a presentation onto the wall, deeds, bank statements, architectural renderings of a sprawling complex with gardens, clinics, and apartments for women betrayed by their families. My dream, fully funded and ready to break ground. You inspired this, I said, my voice trembling with righteous anger. Every lie, every plan to lock me away, every time you treated me like a burden, it fueled this place. A sanctuary for women like me, discarded by those they loved most. Tobias muttered an excuse and fled. My children stayed, pinned by the weight of their own sins. Mr. Cromwell laid out the charges: elder fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Years in prison. Ruin. But I offered them a lifeline, a cruel one, perhaps, but a mother's love is never simple. 5 years, I said. Work at the Hope Center. Build it with your hands, your hearts. Care for the women you were ready to abandon me to. Prove you're more than the vultures I see before me. Or face the consequences. They had 24 hours to decide. The Hope Center construction site was a wasteland of dirt and promise. I stood there the next morning, my heart a battlefield of hope and dread. Eliza held my arm, her presence a steady anchor. Mr. Cromwell waited with a clipboard, ready to call the district attorney if my children chose pride over redemption. At 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up. Charles stepped out first, his designer clothes replaced with worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. Leo followed, his face drawn with exhaustion. Penelope emerged last, her hair in a simple ponytail, her eyes red from crying or sleeplessness, I couldn't tell which. We're here, Charles said, his voice small but resolute. They chose the harder path. 5 years of labor, of proving they could be more than their worst selves. I watched them that first day, hauling rubble under the relentless sun, their soft hands blistering, their pride crumbling with every stone. Charles cursed his aching back. Leo collapsed after an hour, gasping for air. Penelope wept over her broken nails but kept working. Something shifted that day. Not redemption, not yet. But the first crack in the armor of their greed. 4.5 years later, the Hope Center was a miracle. Gardens bloomed where dust had once reigned. Women laughed in art studios, shared stories in book clubs, walked with canes and courage through halls built by hands that had once plotted my destruction. Charles decorated cakes for residents' birthdays, his calloused fingers gentle with frosting. Leo helped an 85-year-old woman take her first steps in months, his eyes shining with a joy I'd never seen in him before. Penelope massaged arthritic hands in the beauty salon she had created, her touch tender, her heart open. They had changed. Not because they had to, but because they had chosen to. The work, the care, the connection, had stripped away the greed and revealed something human beneath. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful day, they stood in my office, no longer prisoners but partners. They renounced any claim to my fortune, asking only to serve the Hope Center for the rest of their lives. They wanted to guard my legacy, not inherit it. I tore up the will that would have given them $500,000 each. In its place, I offered them roles, directors of a growing network of centers, leaders of a movement to restore dignity to women society had forgotten. The rest of my $4.8 million would fund that dream, ensuring no woman would ever face the betrayal I had survived. They hugged me, and for the first time in decades, I felt my children's arms around me, not as heirs but as family. At 76, I walked the gardens of the Hope Center each night, the scent of roses mingling with the laughter of women who had found a home. My legacy was not in dollars or deeds, but in lives restored, in dignity reclaimed, in a family rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Richard had been right. The real legacy is a map. I had drawn one for my children, for the women of the Hope Center, for every family teetering on the edge of greed or grace. And my children, my flawed, redeemed, extraordinary children, would carry it forward. Vengeance had become justice. Punishment had become purpose. And I, Margaret Whitlock, had risen from the grave my children had dug to build a kingdom of hope.